And 3 hours into jury deliberation in this historic New York criminal trial of former President Trump, the jury already sending 2 notes asking for previous testimony and for their instructions to be reread to them by the judge. Joining me now to assess the latest updates in jury deliberations is Josh Hammer, senior editor-at-large at Newsweek, where he hosts the Josh Hammer Show podcast. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Now, the jury requesting testimony, it appears, from David Pecker and Michael Cohen about the 2016 meeting where Pecker and Trump allegedly agreed to the so-called catch and kill plot. What does this signal, and how common is it for a jury to ask for testimony of witnesses, especially this soon into it? And how would the absence of a journalist on the jury impact their deliberations on this issue?
So first of all, let me just make the basic legal point that when it comes to so-called catch and kill schemes, which is basically just paying a fee for an NDA and then just not running the story, that's totally fine. I mean, there is nothing legally problematic with that whatsoever. Catch and kill schemes really go back as far as the entire practice of journalism itself. Personally, I was always kind of dumbfounded when I saw the prosecution trying to play up Mr. Pecker on this whole catch and kill scheme with the National Enquirer. So, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not on the jury. Obviously, I'm not entirely sure what they're discussing right now. But one thing to bear in mind as well when it comes to the catch and kill testimony from Pecker is the jury instructions from Juan Merchan, the judge here, were so vague and so open-ended. I mean, he basically said that you guys can disagree among yourselves as to what the predicate offense is, as to what the in furtherance of tack on to the underlying fraudulent bookkeeping charge is. Maybe some of them think that the David Pecker catch and kill testimony might somehow implicate one of those charges. It's not obvious to me which charge it could possibly even implicate there. But at a bare minimum, what we can definitively say is that the fact that the jurors have been dismissed for the day, the fact that they're coming back in tomorrow morning on Thursday, is great news, I would say, for Donald Trump, because a lot of people are confidently predicting, especially from kind of the left side of the political and legal aisle, a lot of people are confidently predicting that Trump is legally speaking, is a dead man, and that the jury's going to basically come back with a verdict within 30 to 60 minutes. I heard a lot of people kind of say this with full braggadocio, and it has not happened. So thus far, I think, it's all kind of sifting and reading in the tea leaves, but thus far, I like what I see from a Trump perspective, at least.
I think that your assessment is definitely accurate, Josh. I mean, in terms of what they're asking for, the longer they're in there, the more, at least it appears already that there is healthy deliberation, if you will. If not, I won't go as far to say as there's a deadlock at this point. But do you think that this may indicate them asking for the instructions to be reread, that there is some sort of confusion or perhaps disagreement already on the law?
Yeah, I think there's actually a very good chance that they might ask for Merchan to either reread the jury instructions or provide additional clarity on certain facets of those jury instructions tomorrow. Look, I'm a lawyer by background, and I think back to my first year of criminal law course at the University of Chicago Law School. And what you learn in law school when it comes to criminal law is it's very simple and straightforward. There are 2 overarching elements that go into any criminal prosecution, and they're both Latinate terms. You have the actus reus, which is the physical act, so that in a homicide, that's where you actually pull the trigger or so forth. And then you have the mens rea, which is the subjective mentality, the intentionality here. What the prosecution has done in this case, when we're talking here about this in furtherance of tack on, this predicate offense, they haven't spelled any of that out. And, the fact that there are 2 lawyers on this jury, 2 of the 12 jurors happen to be lawyers. One's a corporate lawyer, one's a civil litigator, if memory serves. That has actually always provided me with at least a modicum of solace from the perspective that this is all a sham trial and that Trump should be acquitted. And the reason for that is because when you have lawyers who are on the jury in a situation like this, where the prosecution has literally not actually advanced its black letter theory of the case, and the jury instructions thus far do not even account for what those black letter criminal statutes are, if you have lawyers on the jury, you have to think that they're probably deliberating with their fellow jurors and asking some very rudimentary questions, which is, for example, what is the actual source of law here? How are we possibly going to convict this guy if we don't even know for sure what the statute is that the prosecution's telling us?
To your point, Josh, the jury appeared restless at times from all reports inside the courtroom during the prosecution's presentation, but attentive at others. What might this indicate about their engagement or perceptions of the trial thus far, in your opinion?
So look, I mean, it's all speculative. I mean, the funniest part of juries is like you have people trying to kind of look for kind of the slightest possible reading of the tea leaves, right? So for example, like I haven't been in the courtroom physically, but I have read accounts that there was at least one juror who was apparently nodding along when Todd Blanche, the lead Trump attorney, was making some of his points. That same juror apparently kind of smiled in a very broad smile when Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio entered the courtroom a week or two ago, whenever it was that J.D. was there in the courtroom to support President Trump. And, you know, little things like that do matter because some of these data points do add up. And again, all it takes is one. All it takes is one to get a hung jury. Now, a hung jury doesn't mean that Donald Trump is off the hook, of course. They could just go ahead and then retry this thing a week from now, a month from now. Who knows what exactly the legal docket would look like. But at this point, a hung jury is probably, realistically speaking, the best that I think we can hope for. An acquittal is probably not going to happen. It should happen. This whole thing has been a farce and a sham. I've referred to it as a Stalinist witch hunt. I very much agree with all of that colorful rhetoric when it comes to this case in particular. Again, the prosecution has literally not even said what its actual theory of the case is here. We're talking about the first ever criminal prosecution of a former president of the United States, and we're in uncharted waters at this point. But I do think that a hung jury is probably likelier than anything else if I were just making a straight up prediction.
I mean, you definitely raise an interesting prospect with the hung jury. I mean, do you think that the prosecution and the, you know, New York would actually relitigate this case? And secondly, with two lawyers among the jury, how likely are they to try to clarify any confusion caused by Merchan's jury instructions? And does that also pose any potential risks one way or the other?
Well, I mean, if there is an explicit request tomorrow for the judge to either reread the jury instructions or to kind of explain some of the various details and facets of it, you know, I probably would hazard a guess that it probably is one of those two lawyers who are jurors who are going to be the one asking the question. I could be wrong, of course. I mean, who knows? But I mean, all else equal, it probably will be someone who has some legal training, who was a barred attorney, who was a litigator or a transactional attorney, whatever, who has some semblance of familiarity with the idea of jury instructions and the fact that you need a statute. I mean, you need a crime in order to prosecute someone. You know, this whole thing that the prosecution is trying to do, that they've essentially tried to argue that the in furtherance of tack on to the underlying New York State fraudulent bookkeeping charge could be so vague and capacious as to essentially be in furtherance of a fraud perpetrated upon the American people, you know, winning the 2016 election because of Russia collusion. It's just so patently nonsensical. And again, if any of these jurors have kind of a modicum of intellectual honesty in their bones here, and you know, maybe that's too far of a stretch for a New York City jury pool, maybe it's not. But if any of them do, then those are exactly the kind of questions that they should be asking. To your first question, do I expect the prosecutors to try this again if they get a mistrial? Yes, I absolutely do. I 100% do. They have come this far. They have utterly beclowned themselves. They have suffered the various indignities of people like Michael Cohen doing what he did on the witness stand, where he copped to stealing $30,000 from the Trump organization. They had the salacious testimony of Stormy Daniels. All of us are lower. All of us are much more indignified by the fact that we have gone through this sham proceeding with this ridiculous testimony that, frankly, in many ways has had actual no resemblance to the actual underlying charges, to the extent that we even know the charges. So I think these people basically have no compunction at this point. They're basically unshameable. Alvin Bragg, recall, literally ran for office on a Get Trump platform, and I think that he will give it at least one more go if there is a hung jury in a mistrial.
Well, what a spectacle that would be if this continues. I guess we'll just wait and see. Josh Hammer, really appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.